all of that magic and what it feels like when you were speaking to kept, and we'll go more into that, but that like masculine dominance and feminine surrender, it really feels like the feminist movement really brought forward men and women competing. And
Yes.
I was a single mother, so I was very much like, I can do it on my own, and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. And where a woman is trying to make it in quote unquote a man's world, and what your work feels so much like is more, like letting the masculine take the lead in the scene. The feminine is the oracle; she's taking the lead in the unseen. Um, and being okay with the masculine taking the lead. That's what really comes forward, because I know at one point in my life, I would have been like, oh no, I don't want the masculine to
Yeah.
take the lead. Like,
Yeah,
gross.
of course. Yeah. Common.
um, but it feels like it's really coming back to that, because what we're seeing in the world right now, and I read one of the books that you recommended. I have it on audio, The Oracle, the Queen, the Princess, and the Whore.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. And he speaks, I mean, there's a lot of medicine in that book for sure. Was I triggered? Of course, but
Yeah.
triggers are good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally good. But what he speaks to is we're in a world where there's a lot of weak men because men don't know their place
Yes.
in the world, right? Like women could basically or can basically do anything on their own now. And so they've lost their place, but we need strong men. It's like we need the masculine to rise with us. We can't do it on our own, no matter how much we think that we can. Like they are our complement. Is anything coming forward for you around this as I speak to it?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So yeah, it's a really interesting sort of paradox that we find ourselves in this world, because in reality, it's like it's true. Could we say that certain things have driven women to this point and driven men to this point? Absolutely, on both ends of the spectrum. We both have been intentionally separated from our need of one another in different ways, and it's interesting because so many women share or carry similar beliefs to what you're speaking to. Well, like, well, no, of course, like, or triggers or whatever we want to say, like these belief systems of, well, why would I want that when like that feels controlling, or like I've got this all on my own. But in reality, we've been driven to that, and it's not actually our true nature as women to desire to do all these things on our own, to be single mothers, to raise our families and be in the workforce, driving ourselves into the ground. Like that is not actually our original design. Does it mean we can't do those things? No, this is not speaking to like the ineptness or weakness of the feminine. It's just that our primordial essence is not of the same nature of the masculine primordial essence. The masculine was literally designed to build and be in the world and to take the lead and to initiate and to be like the driving force behind the building of civilizations. Meanwhile, the feminine is the undercurrent, like you were speaking to. She's the unseen, she's the energetic and emotional sustenance, she's the nourishment of all of these things, and she's the creator. But she needs the protection and frame of the masculine to do that creation from a surrendered space where she doesn't have to be holding herself, protecting herself, like pushing herself outward in the world. She can soften back into that space that the masculine is holding for her so that she can more powerfully birth things into the world and not have to burn herself out in the process. So because a lot of women have been driven to that for lots of different reasons and have a lot of trauma around it, it's hard to even feel and touch that place for some of those women of desire and yearning and pain and grief and anger and trauma that lies beyond those belief systems, because it's almost like they've never known another way. And so it's so difficult at first when those beliefs are challenged, because they've become this safe protective armor for a lot of us, that to lay that down requires facing a lot of confronting things like, wow, I'm actually in deep grief. I feel depleted. I feel tired. I don't want to be working 40-hour work weeks and raising a family by myself and, hardly have time to nourish and tend to myself or whatever it might be. And even though there's this deep hunger for masculine support, it's hard to soften and feel vulnerable and safe enough to embody that within ourselves. And then, of course, on the other side, the difficulty is, like you said, men have been purposely deprogrammed and unplugged from this part of themselves. So are there a lot of men that aren't holding that space in society and in the world in their relationships? Absolutely. And so of course that brings up feelings in us as women. We're like, well, I've had all these men that I couldn't rely on. Why should I surrender to a man's lead when I've only been dropped, abandoned, left at the altar, like whatever it might be, betrayed? You know, we both carry trauma towards one another, the masculine towards the feminine towards the masculine. But if either party is in the like victim role, all it does is it severs us, it separates us from one another. And ultimately we both need each other, right? The masculine needs us as well, just as much as we need them, but they've been diminished, disrespected, you know, so many different things by us because of our traumas and wounds. So it creates this vicious cycle of men there are really good men out there that want to take the lead and that want to change society and that want to protect and provide, but they also have been robbed of that by culture and by society. There's literal biological warfare that's happening that is, you know, robbing men of healthy testosterone and their connection to their primal masculinity. And then of course women are feeling the effects of that too on their side. So it's pretty it's tough out there, to be honest, because it's like we're working against a lot of forces that are deliberately trying to separate men and women, and are the force of what union truly is unstoppable. And so, you know, really it's not just an attack. Like feminism is one piece of, like, we'll say the later wave stages of feminism is really only one piece of a bigger picture. It's only one, like it was a very much the last aspects of it were a co-opted movement that were intentionally designed to create this separation between men and women. And ultimately it's a war on life and the life-giving powers of healthy union, healthy polarity, which is like really the driving force of a healthy, thriving civilization. So it's deeper than most people realize. And that's why it's tough being on the leading edge of this kind of work, because there's constant, you know, feedback and like backlash from it, I should say. For those of us who are trying to teach these principles, we're teaching them in a society that has literally been brainwashed to view things very differently than from like primordial, the standpoint of primordial truth or original design has been greatly distorted in our world. So there's a lot to it.
Yeah. So wealth, like a wellspring that you could just dive into around all of that. With the biological warfare. So for you, is there a hidden agenda as to why this is all happening?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say, you know, and again, this is like one of the deepest rabbit holes we could possibly go down, but essentially to try and summarize it in a way to make it digestible for those who are maybe even newer to these topics or just kind of exploring them. There's ultimately there is a hidden agenda around artificial intelligence and around creating a society that is very easy to control. And one of the ways you do that is you essentially take away the power from the men, the primal masculine, because they are the protectors. You know, true men, like truly masculine men who are connected to their primal masculine core, can't be controlled. They can't be, they essentially, like, they see beyond any bullshit. Like they're forces of truth and consciousness and integrity and strength, right? They protect, they are the warriors. They, since the beginning of time, that aspect of men has been leading them to war to protect women and children and villages and civilizations and kingdoms, right? Like that's the healthy expression of primal masculinity. And so when you rob men of that and you feminize them biologically, spiritually, emotionally, energetically, you first of all create a lack of protection of women and children. They become more vulnerable. And then on top of that, you create a massive glitch in the capacity to build healthy, thriving civilizations, because without strong men, you just simply can't do that. Like, women can create, but they can't do that without the protection of the masculine. They're too vulnerable and exposed within that, and any sort of feminist belief that's created this feeling of like, well, women are, no, they're so strong, they don't need men. It's only harmed us in the long run, because ultimately we are strong, but our strength is different than the strength of the masculine, right? Like, we need to have our fragility, our sensitivity, our feminine gifts protected and preserved, and we need the masculine strength for that. So ultimately, when you both masculinize the women, the men also have less to go to war for, because they're not being fueled by the nourishment of feminine energy, because women are so hardened and depleted. They can't provide that kind of devotion and care to the masculine to help fuel them as they go to war for us. So ultimately, beyond the hidden agenda is like, yeah, there's a very deep hidden agenda to create a very technocratic, artificial intelligence based society that is completely disconnected from God, from spirit, and from just the organic principles of life, from union, from healthy families, from healthy children. It's very, very dark. It's a very dark agenda, and everything that is happening culturally is connected to it. Unfortunately, it's kind of in all corners and crevices when you really start turning all the rocks over.